So one thing we do know about the ocean for sure is we know very little about it, especially about marine biodiversity. Now, marine biodiversity refers to the enormous variety of life in the oceans, from the mammals, fish, plants, algae, planktons, microorganisms, etc., living in the water column, as well as on the seabed and below the seabed. Marine biodiversity also includes the genetic material, the genetic information that is present in the cell of the organisms. So let me turn now to fisheries, because my time is very limited. The harvesting of marine living resources by fishing operation is perhaps one of the oldest forms of human interaction with the marine environment. And these resources have been and remain important sources of food and nutrition, livelihoods, and trade for millions of people across the globe, as well as in the Caribbean countries. But with the widespread expansion of fishing capacity that has taken place since the 1950s, fishing has become a major anthropogenic activity impacting negatively on biodiversity in the marine environment. Today, the fish stocks and other marine biological resources which have sustained humans for thousands of years are threatened with degradation and depletion. According to FAO, approximately 34% of world fish stocks are currently overfished or fished beyond sustainable levels. The threats to fisheries and marine biodiversity, they arise from multiple sources, including climate change and ocean acidification. We haven't heard much about ocean acidification, but that's a major problem in the marine environment, as well as those that you have heard yesterday: pollution, degradation of critical habitats and ecosystems, and of course, irresponsible fishing practices. I mean, people usually focus on overfishing, but I want to use a wider term: irresponsible fishing practices, which include illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, as well as bycatch of non-target species, and a host of other irresponsible practices related to fishing gears, etc. But sustainable fisheries and the socioeconomic, nutritional, cultural benefits arising from them are dependent on healthy fish populations. And naturally, also healthy fish populations require healthy marine biodiversity. So when marine biodiversity is diminished or depleted, it undermines the health and productivity of fish stocks, and by extension, food security, jobs, income, foreign exchange earnings, and the economic benefits that our countries and communities get from these valuable resources. Fishing activities naturally have an impact on the population of fish that is targeted. However, fishing also has a major negative impact on the wider marine environment if it's done irresponsibly. And so biodiversity can be severely impacted. And in fact, the available evidence tells us that irresponsible fishing practices are among the leading drivers of biodiversity loss in the oceans. Now, traditional single species approach to fisheries management that has been practiced for thousands of years are not capable of ensuring healthy biodiversity and long-term sustainable fisheries. Improved scientific knowledge and understanding of the complex and dynamic nature and functioning of marine ecosystems and the direct and indirect impacts of fisheries and other human activities on biodiversity and ecosystem health and resilience have led to the conclusion that fisheries must be managed in an ecosystem's context and based on the precautionary approach in order to minimize impacts on biodiversity and achieve long-term sustainable fisheries. Since the early 1990s, ecosystem-based management or ecosystem approach to fisheries have become the norm in fisheries management. A comprehensive set of regional and international instruments and agreements have been developed to ensure that marine biodiversity and environmental protection are integrated into fisheries management. So there have been major changes in fisheries management over the past 30 years or so. Integrated ecosystem-based fisheries management approaches focused on rebuilding and maintaining the productivity, Biodiversity and ecological integrity and resilience of the entire ecosystem, including the fish populations, are already yielding good success in many, many areas. For CARICOM countries, proper conservation, equitable access, and sustainable use of marine biodiversity, including fisheries, is not just important now for our well-being, but it is going to be enormously more important in the future, in the next 40, 60, 100 years from now. And that is because our countries are largely ocean states. The land area of all the CARICOM countries put together is less than 17% of the area under our sovereignty and jurisdiction. Our marine space accounts for well over 82% of the area we have available to us for sustainable development. In my humble opinion, over the next 30 years, CARICOM countries, over the past 30 years, CARICOM countries have made significant strides in developing and implementing the required policy, legal, and institutional frameworks, reforms, and measures to improve fisheries management and minimize impact on biodiversity in the marine environment. However, there is still a long way to go to achieve success in sustainable management of fisheries and in adequately protecting biodiversity. And especially, and it's made more complex and complicated because of the dynamic and rapidly changing environment brought about by climate change and ocean acidification. So some of the key things that we need to focus on going forward in terms of fisheries management and biodiversity protection in the marine environment: expanding and strengthening the use of marine spatial planning and area-based management tools. I heard about that yesterday. Focusing on capacity building and technology transfer to do the things that we need to do in an efficient manner. Focusing on adding value to the catch that we are getting now from the marine environment, from our fisheries. Building partnerships across the board, international, regional, and at the community level and across sectors. Eradicating IUU fishing. This is a major problem for us in the Caribbean, and we have to focus on it. It's very destructive. Improving science and evidence-based decision-making, eliminating the harmful subsidies that are provided to fishers and contribute to IUU fishing and overfishing. Promoting community-based approaches to fisheries management, and completing and implementing that UN agreement aimed at conserving and sustainably using biodiversity in the area beyond national jurisdiction, which is over 2/3 of the world's ocean space, and is a major source of biological diversity, while at the same time addressing the environmental protection challenges and dealing with pollution, etc., and plastics and so on. And you heard all about those yesterday. So, Madam Chair, moderator, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Horton, for such a comprehensive presentation. You got quite a lot into a short space of time. You pointed out the challenges of our current status of the fisheries resource management in the Caribbean, and you also highlighted that the measures that should be taken, we've already identified what those are, and some steps have already been implemented. I wanted to zero in though on the fact that the Caribbean being mainly ocean states, the fact that our fisheries resources are being so rapidly and dramatically depleted has serious implications for food security and also the livelihoods of a substantive portion of the Caribbean population. And so it really needs to be. He has quite an extensive background in natural resource management, but his major focus is on the marine sciences, in particular oceanography, and I know he also addresses coastal resource management issues as well. He's also worked in the areas of invasive species management, environmental policy frameworks, environmental education, and information dissemination. And his presentation is actually now going to turn our focus to that of urban planning and development and how biodiversity can be incorporated into these affairs. Dr. Townsend?
All right, thank you, Suzanne, for such a lovely introduction. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the ministry for inviting us to be a part of this conference. It's not usual that one thinks about biodiversity and urban spaces. So it's our pleasure to come and share some of the work that we have done so far and to give you a little peek into some of the future endeavors that we have. So first of all, I'm representing the UDC, and our mission is to enable Jamaica's sustainable development by facilitating the economic, social, and environmental development of urban areas while ensuring a viable cooperation. And I represent the Natural Resources Management and Environmental Planning Department, and we take this mission very seriously. And our role in helping the UDC achieve its mission is to ensure that there is protection of wildlife, natural ecosystems, and ensuring sustainable use of all our natural resources. So today we're going to share with you some information on urban blue and green spaces, mainly the ones that the UDC has been a part of creating. But first of all, we need to talk about what's the importance of these spaces. Now, multiple studies have been done, and they have proven that these spaces reduce stress, boost mental health, and create an environment for persons to become physically healthy. Many of us know that green spaces are associated with better air quality, reduced traffic noise, cooler temperature, greater diversity, and in urban spaces where green spaces are also incorporated, it also increases the value of your property. Parks and rivers, lakes are areas of recreation, and they also have proven to reduce stress, enhance social cohesion, and support physical activity. Many persons may not realize that not only just the social aspect of green spaces, but some of them are quite functional. In terms of helping for flood mitigation, wastewater disposal when you think about our rivers and lakes, and even transportation. I'll go into a little more information on that a little later. Now, the pandemic has brought to the fore the importance of these spaces because people now realize how important it is to be outside, and so it's become something that we have taken a great interest in. Before it was like, oh, it's just there and we don't really use it, but now we see the importance of using it, getting outside and socializing, interacting with nature, and basically creating some peace of mind. And these spaces allow, because they're open spaces, we can allow for the social distances and adhering to the protocols that have been issued in recent times. Now, from the planning perspective, there are several questions that we ask when we're creating these green spaces. You know, first of all, where are we going to put it? What size is it going to be? How is it going to benefit the community? Now, some things that people may not even think about is how are these spaces going to be maintained and managed? How can we create these spaces and incorporate the biodiversity, and in some instances even enhance it? So these are all of the things that we strive to achieve when we are creating these blue and green spaces. Now, many of you may be familiar with the spaces that the UDC has created over the years. First and foremost, the world famous Dunn's River Falls and Park. And I'd like to share with you that is the actual official name of the park, the world famous Dunn's River Park. So other spaces that persons might be familiar with is like the Ocho Rios Bay Beach in the town of Ocho Rios, the Green Grotto Caves, which is our platinum Green Globe certified, and I think it's the only one in Jamaica. And we have many beaches that we manage and other waterfalls such as the Reach Falls. But I want to share with you some of the latest things that we have done and how we have incorporated biodiversity into the planning and implementation or creation of these spaces. So on this, the figure that you're seeing is a map of the Montego Bay waterfront, and a little historical tidbit is that this is the largest land reclamation project that the government has ever undertaken, and it was done in the 1970s. And what we have done recently is to create the Harmony Beach Park, which many people would have known it as Dump Up Beach or Closed Harbor Beach. Now, the figure that's labeled 2001 shows how the park was at that time, and you can see the green spaces in the green and, well, we'll call this a blue space, considering that it's at the coastal waterfront. And what we did in creating the space is that we worked in harmony with nature. And if you see, the arrows are pointing out some of the tree clusters which were there in 2001 and are still there now in 2021. It was a pleasure to be a part of the team that worked to create the Harmony Beach Park, because I was able to sit in a room deliberating with our experts, our architects, our engineers, and whenever it came up to placing buildings or structures where a tree was, the immediate response was not to get rid of the tree. It was to, how do we preserve the tree and still create the space that we wanted to? And so we were able to preserve the trees and create a world-class beach facility that is available to both tourists and locals. Now, this development is not completed, because over the years there was, because of natural disasters such as hurricanes and storms, the groins that have been protecting the coastline have been destroyed. And so they're not functioning as much as they should be, and so we are about to commence with the rejuvenation of the groins. And many of you persons who are in Montego Bay would notice that some areas have been closed off, because we have to ensure the safety of the public while doing this. Now, apart from reducing coastal erosion, one of the other things that this project would also enhance is the biodiversity of corals within the area. Now, because this was not a natural occurring area and the groins are man-made, we were happy to see that there was a massive coral recruitment. And so this is one way in which the hard infrastructure has enhanced biodiversity, because now there are corals where corals were not before. And so the rejuvenation of the area will also protect them and continue with the recruitment of the corals. So we are looking to enhance the coastal resilience of the area. This is part of creating Jamaica's first sustainable city, which Montego Bay is the focal point. And the enhancing of the groins will reduce negative wave impacts and so reduce erosion, but at the same time, it's creating protection for the coral reefs that are there. And so we'll be enhancing the marine life. Another exciting venture that we are currently embarking on is the creation of Jamaica's first wildlife sanctuaries. Now, we always hear about sanctuaries, we know about fish sanctuaries, we know about game bird sanctuaries, but this would be Jamaica's first wildlife sanctuary with that official title, okay? Now, the Goat Islands, if you remember from Ms. Parchment's presentation yesterday, the Goat Islands are the Goat Islands are off the coast of South St. Catherine, Clarendon area, and it's a part of the Portland Bight Protected Area, which is the largest protected area in Jamaica. And what we're striving to do is to create a wildlife sanctuary that would be a home to many of our endemics, such as the Jamaican iguana, the Jamaican boa, the coney, and the blue-tailed gallywasp, which is one of our largest reptiles, lizards, I should say. So this is just a sneak peek of our next venture, and as you can tell, its primary focus is to preserve biodiversity and enhance the area. So currently the islands are not home to these animals, and we're carrying out research to ensure that the vegetation that is there would be able to support the life, and would also create an opportunity for Jamaicans to go and see these animals in the wild. Okay? Now, other activities that we have coming up are, for instance, our sustainable community model, which it's basically creating a park in every parish. So we'll be creating more green spaces and allowing for Jamaicans to be able to have recreational space to relax and be one with nature, so to speak. We are also creating one such development is in Portmore. It's also fondly called the Climate Change Park. And we are also in the process of developing the Caymanas area, and one of the primary focus of that area is to identify lands that can be used for conservation. So this would be in addition to the conservation activities that we have in the Portland Bight area of the Hellshire Hills and the Goat Islands, and creating more spaces. We're also doing an inventory of all the assets that the corporation are in custodian on behalf of the Jamaican people to identify more areas where conservation can be key. So that's just a little sneak peek into what we've been doing. You can follow the UDC's progress on all our social media platforms. All of them are UDC Jamaica. Very easy to remember. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Townsend. I'm sure many of us didn't know that all of this activity was happening in terms of trying to incorporate biodiversity into our human spaces. And what I found interesting, that the interventions that you mentioned, I see where they would be based on available science coming perhaps from universities and research partnerships. And this is so important that, you know, you end up planting native trees and not trees that might be invasive. You make the correct choices with the biodiversity that you're introducing into the spaces. And thank you so much for mentioning about this whole, because mental health has been one of the topical subjects of how this pandemic has affected everybody. And I don't know, persons may find when you go outdoors, even in your garden, it makes a difference. You find yourself getting calm, just hearing being outside, and you really don't get that kind of experience when you're surrounded by concrete. So I really am encouraged to hear about the work happening with UDC, and we look forward to hearing more about these interventions in the future. All right, so things are really interesting here this morning on our panel discussion, The Value of Biodiversity to Human Well-Being, if you're just joining us, to have our third presenter, and this is going to be Mr. Ferron. This is Albert Ferron from the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute. This is CARDI. And he is the senior livestock scientist and also the head of the livestock section in Jamaica. And his training and experience spans animal nutrition, forage agronomy, extension and technical services, and animal production. And in 1997, he was appointed animal productionist with responsibilities for small ruminant production to Jamaica and the countries in which CARDI operates. So Mr. Ferron, we're so very happy to have you this morning, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. And I must say how happy I am this morning to be participating in this very important function. And we're just going to give you a look at CARDI's perspective as far as biodiversity is concerned throughout the region. Okay, so we'll be just looking at some of the area in which CARDI is concentrate on. We're looking at the threats and to biodiversity, and we'll be also looking at what is CARDI's response to all of this in these areas. So the Caribbean diversity, it's really a hotspot as we talk about the Caribbean. The region supports approximately over 10,000 plants species, 71% being endemic to the archipelago. You know, the Caribbean runs very long, and this is an area that much emphasis has been placed on. For vertebrates, the following are endemic: 100% of the 189 amphibian species, 95% of the 520 reptile species, 74% of the 69 mammalia species, most of which are bats, of course, and approximately 24% of this over 700 bird species that we have here in the Caribbean. Species endemic to the hotspots represent about 2.6% of the world's over 300 plants species and about 3.5% of the world's 27,000 vertebrate species. Some of the areas, some of these are threats, and if we look, we see that in terms of agriculture, where we have agriculture being a threat to biodiversity, land use and land use change, and basically how we farm, and we recently noted the lionfish as a very invasive species, especially to our small island developing states. Now, what is CARD's response to all of this? The institution is guided, of course, by the global and regional and national policies within CARD. One of CARD's main strategic program is the value chain services, in which CARD implement innovative, sustainable, climate-smart food and agricultural systems to enable or enhance markets industry throughout the Caribbean. So we look to see how we can sustain striking balance between the conservation of ecosystem and the effective use for food and nutrition security in this region. All right, so the first we look at the management of the invasive species, and these are some of the areas we look at. Coordination of forums and regional dialogue to facilitate collaboration at the regional level since 2003. And we act as chair of the Caribbean Invasive Species Working Group. And also CARDI is an executive member of the Caribbean Plant Health Directors Forum. In terms of prevention and containment and management, we coordinated the regional responses to threats, include the pink mealbug, which we have done a lot of work on, the red palm mite, the giant African snail, and the black Sikatoga disease, which have been diseases that plague the region over the past recent time. Currently, we are collaborating with the Caribbean Plant Health Directors Forum and the CASPA to develop protocols aimed at preventing the introduction of the banana TR4. And of course, we do component research in integrated pest management, looking at biological, cultural, and chemical controls measures. In terms of integrated pest management, over the years, and I'll just go a bit quick on this, we have looked at areas which we could control the coffee berry borer, and we have developed like traps and things. So see that these are some of the things we do. We look using a clean seeding material, good agronomical practices, and field sanitation. We have introduced the pheromone trapping, among others, other biological control. And of course, we also looked at developing of biopesticide to contribute to the rich diversity of microorganisms in the region. This represents an untapped potential, which we are still working on. CARDI has a unique advantage to develop its own network of biopesticide centers to research and development in the region. Sorry. We also look at the PGR, some of the plant genetic resources, and over the years, CARDI has been responsible for a large amount of seeds, and we have prided ourselves in development of several species or several varieties of hot pepper. We are famous for the Caribbean red, West Indian red, sweet pepper, the Moruga red, and later we have collaborated with the Jamaica Ministry of Agriculture to develop and preserve our favorite Scotch bonnet pepper. We've also been able to do work on grains, which is characterized by evaluating and development. We have areas like our large island in Belize, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago, and Antigua to a lesser extent, where we have our seed banks and so on. So, of course, we're able to extend our plant genetic resource because the number of trials and biofortified beans and so on that we do. Most of this work is done in Belize, but it's available to all the countries of the Caribbean, all the areas of the Caribbean. Of course, we'll just mention peanut, zea maize, corn that we have been doing work on over the years. We also developed vegetative planting material, which we also not only preserve, but we have a lab which we can preserve some of these pesticides. And I'll quickly jump through to some of the regional plant genetic management, where we have areas, of course, to conserve and to multiply some of these. Also, we have doing a lot of work in animal genetic resources. And Jamaica is probably the rich point as far as come to animal genetic resources. While we deliver through the College of Agriculture, the Bogles, the Cardi Center, there are several areas. And then, of course, we must go back to look at some of the effects of animal genetic resource over the years. How can we forget the Jamaica Brahman, the Jamaica Red Pole, the Jamaica Black, and of course our beloved Jamaica Hope cattle, which was all developed by the great Thomas P. Leckie. These are some of the areas that Jamaica also has 3 lines of the Jamaica Hope that and now we're looking to open up the herd book to richen the diversity. And if I may mention one thing, in Trinidad, because of the calypso and the buffalo, they also developed a strain called the Buffalipso, which is being maintained actually by the government of the Caribbean. And so in Jamaica, we are also managing and utilizing our native breed of goat, because everybody loves curry goat in Jamaica. But we realize that over the years we have been introducing exotic breeds, and we're losing the touch of the local breed. So Cardi is now in the process of collecting the genetic material of the local animal, local goat, and see how it is affected over the years and how we can preserve that genetic resource.
Aaron, in the interest of time,
yes.
What would you say you see happening in the future for the region? A lot is going on.
Yeah, a lot is going on, but we need some policies that would help us to do the interregional trade, because where Cardi sits, we have an arm around the Caribbean. So maybe something is happening good in Jamaica and it's not happening in other places. So what we do, we're doing a coordinated role and expecting to develop policies to enrich the biodiversity, as we're doing now and we have done in the past. We just want to continue to strengthen that area, and that is what Cardi is working on.
Okay. All right, is that the end of your presentation?
Well, I had a few more, but basically one thing that I want to mention,
yes,
in one of the ways that we hope to move forward with the biodiversity in animals, we have introduced and we have had training and we have trained persons in things like artificial insemination, embryo transfer, so we can move the same native animal we're talking about from the hills of St. Mary into the plains of Clarendon, and we can also go across nations. So we're doing that, and other things that we develop, both plant and animal biodiversity.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ferron. You have certainly given us a lot of food for thought. And one thing I would like to highlight and thank you for is that you brought in the genetic diversity into the discussion, the genetic diversity, because when we speak of biodiversity, we not only talk about the visible plants and animals, there is also that invisible side, so to speak, the genetics, you know, what happens at the molecular level, and that sometimes is overlooked. So thank you for bringing that into your presentation and showing the importance of that. And another significant point that stands out was the importance of regional collaborations and how much work has been achieved through these regional collaborations, you know, not only in plant and animal breeding, but also in integrated pest management. And so these, of course, are initiatives that we definitely want to maintain and incorporate new technologies. I noted the potential for biopesticides. So thank you for bringing that perspective to the table. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're at our last panelist, and this is Ms. Bellamy, Lily Claire Bellamy, Executive Director of the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office. And Ms. Bellamy has extensive experience in intellectual property. She's a lawyer by profession, and her experience also encompasses health administration and environmental law, and she has worked on gender and child development issues. So we welcome Ms. Bellamy to our panel, and we look forward to seeing what she brings to the table on a lesser heard area in terms of the intellectual property and its relevance to biodiversity. Ms. Bellamy, over to you.
So much, thanks so much, Dr. Dave. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change. Also to acknowledge Ms. Gillian Guthrie, the Acting Chief Technical Director, and also to thank Ms. Joni Jackson for all the work that she has done in facilitating my participation here today. And I'd also like to recognize you, the moderator, who has worked closely with us at the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, and to recognize my colleague panelists. Since, as you mentioned, I'm coming from an intellectual property point of view, and persons may think, what is the relevance of intellectual property to the Convention on Biological Diversity? How do we have anything to do with biodiversity and human well-being? Well, as you mentioned, I'm an attorney, so I'm going to start with a definition that the World Wildlife Fund has used in the definition of biodiversity. And biodiversity, as defined by the World Wildlife Fund, is all the different kinds of life you'll find in one area. The variety of animals, plants, fungi, and even microorganisms like bacteria that make up our natural world. Each of these species and organisms work together in ecosystems like an intricate web to maintain balance and support life. Biodiversity supports everything in nature that we need to survive: food, clean water, medicine, and shelter. The National Geographic Encyclopedia defines it as the variety of living species on Earth, including plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi. While Earth's biodiversity is so rich that many species have yet to be discovered, and many are being threatened with extinction due to human activities, putting the Earth's magnificent biodiversity at risk. And we heard by the previous panelists from the UDC that they recognize the importance and relevance of trees. So when they're doing their planning, they try to accommodate any form of genetic resource. Now, in the area of intellectual property, the World Intellectual Property Organization is a United Nations body with responsibility for intellectual property. And their definition of intellectual property says it's the creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. Intellectual property is protected in law by patents, copyright, and trademarks. And we also just heard about a trademark, the world famous Dunn's River Falls and Park. That's an example of a trademark. So basically, intellectual property allows and enables people to earn recognition or financial benefit from what they invent or create. The intellectual property system aims to create a balance between the interests of the innovator and the wider public, to have a system where creativity and innovation can flourish. Now, most people may have heard about the World Trade Organization Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights Agreement because there is a recognition and an acknowledgement that intellectual property is at the hub of trade. So the WTO also has a definition of intellectual property. And basically their definition says it's the rights given to persons over the creations of their minds. They usually give the creator an exclusive right over the use of his or her creation for a certain period of time. And intellectual property rights are customarily divided into two main areas: copyright and related rights, and industrial property. Yesterday, we had an example of copyright when the poet laureate did her presentation. So artistic works, literary works, for example, books and other writings, musical compositions, paintings, sculptures, computer programs, and films are all protected by copyright. Okay, and the main purpose of the protection of copyright, according to the WTO, is to encourage and reward creative work. And then, as we mentioned, there are two main areas in intellectual property, the second area being industrial property. And industrial property can usually be divided into two main areas. One area can be characterized as a protection of distinctive signs, and that would be trademarks. So what a trademark does is it distinguishes the goods or services of one undertaking from those of another undertaking. So to use the example of the Dunn's River Falls and part, the world famous, so you know that you're going there versus going to Reach Falls based on the distinctiveness of the sign, which is the trademark. And then we have geographical indications, which identify a good as originating in a place where a given characteristic of the good is essentially attributable to its geographical origin. So for example, we have Jamaica jerk and we have Jamaica rum, and those can be directly linked to the soil of Jamaica. We have a certification mark, which acts in some instances as a geographical indication to protect our Jamaica Blue Mountain coffee. And so that is a genetic resource which provides us with the world famous Jamaica Blue Mountain coffee. So the protection of such distinctive signs aims to stimulate and ensure fair competition and to protect consumers by enabling them to make an informed choice between various goods and services. The protection may last indefinitely, provided the sign in question continues to be distinctive. Other types of industrial property are protected primarily to stimulate innovation, design, and the creation of technology. In this category, we would have patents, industrial designs, and trade secrets. So the social purpose is basically to provide protection for the results of investment in the development of new technology. And I'm emphasizing the new technology, and I'll get to that later. Thus giving the incentive and means to finance research and development activities. A functioning intellectual property regime should also facilitate the transfer of technology in the form of foreign direct investments, joint ventures, and licensing. So while the basic social objectives of intellectual property protection are as outlined, it should also be noted that the exclusive rights given are subject usually to limitations and exceptions, aim at fine-tuning the balance to be found between the legitimate interests of rights holders and the users. So I'm going to segue now into the Convention on Biological Diversity and to show the link between the CBD and intellectual property rights. There are three main objectives of the CBD, and those are the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of the components of biological diversity, and this is the one I want you to focus and really pay attention to. It's a fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. Now, you have the CBD, and then there was the Nagoya Protocol, which is a supplementary agreement to the CBD. And its purpose, the Nagoya Protocol's purpose, is to provide for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. And we heard earlier that genetic resources cover a wide gamut. So the Nagoya Protocol covers traditional knowledge, and it covers the traditional knowledge that's associated with genetic resources that are covered by the CBD and the benefits arising from its utilization. And this is where we find a nexus between biological diversity and intellectual property. And in the year 2000, the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is the body with responsibility for IP, which I mentioned earlier, established the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge, and Folklore. And that committee is commonly referred to as the IGC. Basically, the discussions at the Intergovernmental Committee are aimed at arriving at an agreement on a legal instrument or instruments that would provide for the intellectual property protection of genetic resources, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions, or folklore as it's referred to. The significance of the intellectual property system in this area arises because of the development of new technologies, right? And those new technologies, among other things, highlighted the economic value of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge, which became an important component of patentable inventions. As a result, many people began to argue that the patent regime should help to prevent misappropriation and promote fair benefit sharing between holders of the assets, mostly biodiversity-rich countries, like most of the countries of the South, Jamaica included, and other Caribbean countries, and those with the modern technologies to access and use them. So before this committee came into being, the World Intellectual Property Organization conducted a number of fact-finding missions throughout the world and also in the Caribbean. And when that fact-finding mission was done in Jamaica, they worked closely with the Institute of Jamaica and also with the Intellectual Property Office, DIPO. So those fact-finding missions, regional consultation, workshops, and roundtables on genetic resources, traditional cultural expressions, and traditional knowledge in the 1990s was done to ascertain the needs and expectations of indigenous and local communities, as well as representatives of government, industry, and civil society around the world, as there was a recognition that traditional knowledge has and continues to play an important role in the maintenance of our biodiversity. The recognition of the need to have a legal instrument in place that would protect this knowledge and allow for those with the knowledge to benefit from same is at the heart of the work of the IGC. So in terms of the well-being of humans and the convergence between intellectual property and biodiversity, the IP regime recognizes that there is knowledge and that there are resources and that people exploit and utilize those resources. So there needs to be a recognition and acknowledgement of the owners of the resources and those with the traditional knowledge that can be shared to develop new technologies and new forms of innovation that will benefit all of us. So we're working, I mean, it's a long process because as I mentioned, this started from the year 2000 and we still don't have a legal instrument or instruments in place to recognize how all of us can benefit. So those who are rich in the biodiversity versus those with the ability to translate the traditional knowledge and the way we use that traditional knowledge with our genetic resources and our biodiversity to create solutions for the problems of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bellamy, for such an enlightening presentation. And you pointed out that important gap that we have in our legislation that needs to be filled. And we know that the government has been considering the Nagoya Protocol to fully commit to it. So we hope that now that you have shared this perspective, for those who were not previously informed, it will give them food for thought and help them to be more sensitized to the importance of orienting our legal instruments so that at a national level we can benefit from investments that are biodiversity related. And while you were speaking, for our audience, I picked up a bit of a thread with some of our other panelists, because you mentioned industrial property, and I'm not even going to try to remember that name for the Duns River Falls, but you all know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, thank you. But, you know, what's in a name? I work at a museum, the Natural History Museum of Jamaica, and names are important. And right there's a legal instrument to protect, you know, that particular landmark through its name. And then I thought of the whole matter of the genetic diversity that Mr. Ferron mentioned, and also thinking back to what Mr. Horton had spoken about, the fish stock. We hear about Dr. Lecky's work. We know that we have ongoing work with varieties of cattle. We don't hear so much. I'm sure it's there, but we don't hear it as publicized in the marine sphere about the, you know, the breeds and the varieties. But right there are legal instruments that can help protect the intellectual property. And he spoke of the potential of biopesticides. So perhaps in moving forward, there might be some scope. I don't know. You could comment on, you know, any sort of new developments, you know, even if it's not technology and it is just doing new breeds through traditional methods, can be protected through intellectual property. So, actually, very relevant, quite relevant.
I'd just like to add one thing, Dr. Davis. We actually are working, and we worked closely with this ministry to put a law in place. We have actually worked closely on the cabinet submission to put a law in place to recognize and protect the intellectual property associated with genetic resources, traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. So we have that in train, and that should be shared with our parent ministry, which is the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, for consideration by the cabinet. Additionally, the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office has been working with other agencies of government to put in place a law that would protect breeders of new plant varieties. So again, the intellectual property regime is looking at ways to protect our innovators and our plant breeders that come up with new varieties of plants, to give them the right over what they have created. And because that is one way to help to recognize your particular situation and circumstance, and to come up with a breed that will be able to grow if there is extreme drought or if we have a lot of rain. So taking into consideration the circumstances, and what your biodiversity is, and how you can come up with a new variety that you can protect and that you can share with others, but that you would retain the intellectual property right over. So that also is in train. So steps are being taken, even though, as you mentioned, we still have work to do on Nagoya. In other channels, work is being done to put a legal instrument in place, irrespective of the fact that there isn't an international treaty or treaties. There are member states of the World Intellectual Property Organization that have legislation in place that will protect that area, and Jamaica is working towards achieving that.
Clara, we're going to have to leave it there, though. I know you're very passionate about this area, but thank you so much for sharing that with us. And And that is very good to know that, you know, the cabinet will be receiving that document soon. Okay, I understand we have a question from an audience.
Yes, we have a question from Shamir Laws from the Event Via platform. They ask, there was the mention of the Nayoga Protocol, but are there any national legislation or policies to prevent the exploitation of genetic resources?
So this is an area I understand where we have some gaps, and Lily Claire had alluded to that in her presentation. So Lily Claire, I would just hand back to you and ask if you want to comment a little bit more on that.
Okay, Dr. Davis. Well, as I was saying, the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, we actually work with the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change. And we have a cabinet submission that is seeking to put in place a law that would address the intellectual property aspects of traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, and our genetic resources. So while it may not be on all points with Nagoya, it does acknowledge and recognize some areas. But so from the point of view of the intellectual property regime, there is work being done on having legislation in place to address that.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience? No? Okay, then, well, this would bring us to the end of our panel discussion. I really hope that everyone, panelists and audience included, enjoyed this session as I did. I'm so happy that our panelists were able to engage with us the way they did, and the type of information we were able to create links, even though the fields of the presenters are fairly diverse. So thank you very much to all our panelists. I'd like to thank the ministry for putting on this conference. It's a very good initiative, and we invite our audience to continue to enjoy the proceedings through the day. I am your moderator, Suzanne Davis. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
So thank you very much, Dr. Davis, and to again thank the panelists, thank the audience for joining us. We're going to go into a featured video. The Forest is the Bush of Life. It's a video prepared by the Forestry Department. But before we go into the video, I just wanted to respond to the question raised as well. So in addition to the work that is going to be done by by JIPO in terms of the intellectual property issues related to genetic resources. The Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, in collaboration with the United Nations Development Programme, is preparing a project proposal for submission to the Global Environment Facility to put together legislation that will respond to the provisions of the Nagoya Protocol. This is one of the only protocols that we have not yet ratified that's related to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and so work is ongoing to fill that legislative gap. So I just wanted to let our audience know. So now we go into our featured present video on The Forest is the Bush of Life, a video by the Forestry Department.
Jamaica's forests, mysterious, majestic, wondrous, life force of nature. A unique habitat for biologically diverse species of flora and fauna found nowhere else in the world. The lungs and breath of the earth, trees in the forest absorb carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen essential to life, cooling down the planet. Forests collect and filter rainwater, releasing it to flow through the veins of the earth. Covering almost 40% of the island, Jamaica's forests form a tapestry of exquisite beauty, from untouched, pristine broadleaf trees in the heart of the island to waterlogged mangroves in brackish waters along the coast. The forest is the bush of life. Many products come from it that are vital to our survival. It's the source of livelihood for many people. When we destroy the forest, it degrades our watersheds, releases harmful carbon into the air, and leaves us vulnerable to extreme weather conditions. Forests act as a buffer, protecting us from natural disasters, reducing soil erosion, filtering and purifying our water.
My connection to the forest is deeply rooted.
The forest means everything. It means life. It means existence.
Forests in Jamaica breathe life into an interconnected community of plants, animals, and other organisms. Covering 40% of the island, they form the backbone of the country. From the mountaintop to our shoreline, different types can be identified, including primary forests, untouched in their original state, the most biologically diverse ecosystems on Earth. There are also other broadleaf forests that have been affected by human interaction. Tall and short, open dry forests, swamps and mangroves growing in a combination of fresh and salt water. All these forests nurture a wealth of endemic flora and fauna.
Our forests are really unique and special. You have the medicinal plants. We have a number of ferns. We have trees in our forest that exist nowhere else.
The Blue Mountains Forest Reserve is Jamaica's largest continuous block of natural closed broadleaf forest and the most significant source of water for the eastern end of the island.
We have so many species of endemic birds, the swallowtail butterfly, the Jamaican toady, and our beautiful water, as you can see around me.
The Cockpit Country is one of the largest remaining areas of wet limestone forest in Jamaica, with just over half covered by closed broadleaf forest. It supports the highest number of globally threatened species in the Caribbean and is the source of 40% of Jamaica's water.
Cockpit Country never dry. Can guarantee that. The tree is important to us as we important to the trees. The fresh air when I breathe at night, I have to use for our AC.
I love the trees. It gives you good health, you know? It's because of the air here, why I'm still here.
Forests are vital for life on Earth. Mangroves are tropical and subtropical trees and plants that live primarily in coastal environments. Mangroves can be found in every parish. They thrive mostly in the brackish wetlands on the south coast as well as on the north coast. Jamaican mangrove forests are a biologically diverse and productive ecosystem.
They're very important to us as human beings who happen to live near mangroves.
The mangrove is like a wall, we call it a buffer, that keeps back the strong force of wind that comes with an hurricane, and it also keeps back the high tide from entering into the community.
Mangroves control erosion, improve water quality, trap soil and sediments, protect coral reefs, and build up the land. They provide a nursery ground and habitat for fish, shellfish, and other species, as well as a refuge for marine animals. Jamaican mangroves present ecotourism opportunities and support local livelihoods.
The mangrove, it's where the fish them breed. Them hide the night, grow at night. No other predator can come and catch it. We have to protect it. Protect the fish that we can catch and make our money.
Mangrove forests are among the most carbon-rich ecosystems globally and play a critical role in the fight against climate change.
Mangrove forests can actually capture and retain and hold for an indefinite period the most carbon per unit of forest and prevent that carbon from causing harmful effects in our climate.
Jamaican mangroves are hardy and resilient, but are under threat from urban area expansion, industrial development, and other human activities.
Person used to use it for charcoal burning, feed animals or such. They didn't really know the importance. Now we know to protect it because it is protecting us.
Mangroves are important for our quality of life. We need to recognize their worth, value them, and allow them to thrive. Act now to protect and preserve the mangroves. The forest is the bush of life. It's essential that we manage this valuable resource responsibly so we can benefit socially and economically in a sustainable way. Respect the cycle of life, protect the forest, and preserve it for the future. Jamaica's forests, mysterious, majestic, wondrous, life force of nature. A unique habitat for biologically diverse species of flora and fauna found nowhere else in the world. The lungs and breath of the earth, trees in the forest absorb carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, essential to life, cooling down the planet. Forests collect and filter rainwater, releasing it to flow through the veins of the earth. Covering almost 40% of the island, Jamaica's forests form a tapestry of exquisite beauty, from untouched, pristine broadleaf trees in the heart of the island to waterlogged mangroves in brackish waters along the coast. The forest is the bush of life. Many products come from it that are vital to our survival. It's the source of livelihood for many people. When we destroy the forest, it degrades our watersheds, releases harmful carbon into the air, and leaves us vulnerable to extreme weather conditions. Forests act as a buffer, protecting us from natural disasters, reducing soil erosion, filtering and purifying our water.
My connection to the forest is deeply rooted.
The forest means everything. It means life. It means existence.
Forests in Jamaica breathe life into an interconnected community of plants, animals, and other organisms. Covering 40% of the island, they form the backbone of the country. From the mountaintop to our shoreline, different types can be identified, including primary forests, untouched in their original state. The most biologically diverse ecosystems on Earth. There are also other broadleaf forests that have been affected by human interaction. Tall and short, open dry forests. Swamps and mangroves growing in a combination of fresh and salt water. All these forests nurture a wealth of endemic flora and fauna.
Our forests are really unique and special. You have the medicinal plants. We have a number of ferns. We have trees in our forest that exist nowhere else.
The Blue Mountains Forest Reserve is Jamaica's largest continuous block of natural closed broadleaf forest and the most significant source of water for the eastern end of the island.
We have so many species of endemic birds, the swallowtail butterfly, the Jamaican toady, and our beautiful water, as you can see around me.
The Cockpit Country is one of the largest remaining areas of wet limestone forest in Jamaica, with just over half covered by closed broadleaf forest. It supports the highest number of globally threatened species in the Caribbean and is the source of 40% of Jamaica's water.
Cockpit Country never dry. Can guarantee that. The tree is important to us as we important to the trees. The fresh air when I breathe at night, I have to use for our AC.
I love the trees. It gives you good health, you know? It's because of the air here, why I'm still here.
Forests are vital for life on Earth. Mangroves are tropical and subtropical trees and plants that live primarily in coastal environments. Mangroves can be found in every parish. They thrive mostly in the brackish wetlands on the south coast as well as on the north coast. Jamaican mangrove forests are a biologically diverse and productive ecosystem.
They're very important to us as human beings who happen to live near mangroves.
The mangrove is like a wall. We call it a buffer that keeps back the strong force of wind that comes with an hurricane, and it also keeps back the high tide from entering into the community.
Mangroves control erosion, improve water quality, trap soil and sediments, protect coral reefs, and build up the land. They provide a nursery ground and habitat for fish, shellfish, and other species, as well as a refuge for marine animals. Jamaican mangroves present ecotourism opportunities and support local livelihoods.
The mangrove, it's where the fish them breed. Them hide the night, grow at night. No other predator can come and catch it. We have to protect it. Protect the fish that we can catch and make our money.
Mangrove forests are among the most carbon-rich ecosystems globally and play a critical role in the fight against climate change.
Mangrove forests can actually capture and retain and hold for an indefinite period the most carbon per unit of forest and prevent that carbon from causing harmful effects in our climate.
Jamaican mangroves are hardy and resilient, but are under threat from urban area expansion, industrial development, and other human activities.
Person used to use it for charcoal burning, feed animals or such. They didn't really know the importance. Now we know to protect it because it is protecting us.
Mangroves are important for our quality of life. We need to recognize their worth, value them, and allow them to thrive. Act now to protect and preserve the mangroves. The forest is the bush of life. It's essential that we manage this valuable resource responsibly so we can benefit socially and economically in a sustainable way. Respect the cycle of life, protect the forest, and preserve it for the future.
Fisheries play an important role in Jamaica's economic development. In 2017, the fishing industry contributed 79. Fisheries play an important role in Jamaica's economic development. In 2017, the fishing industry contributed $79.76 million to the gross domestic product, with total exports valued at $12.12 million. Since then, catches have decreased and aquaculture production has declined. This is due to overfishing and the effects of climate change, such as warming sea temperatures, storm surges, and rising sea levels.
The fish migrate to the deeper water. So where I could catch some fish, I catch no more fish there.
Well, welcome back again. We have another exciting panel, and this panel will deal with the issue of sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation. We have some great experts with us today, and the session will be moderated by Alison Rangolan. Alison Rangolan is the Chief Technical Director of the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, the EFJ, and has occupied various positions at the foundation since 2013. She has represented Jamaica at regional and international conservation, financing, and project management events, including building networks with bilateral and multilateral agencies. She's a member of the Women in Renewable Energy Network, which is a part of the Clinton Foundation's Clinton Climate Initiative, the CCCI. Alison is a director of the Grace Kennedy Foundation and chair of the foundation's Environment Committee. She's also a director of the Scientific Research Council, the International Center for Environmental and Nuclear Science, and the Water Resources Authority. Alison graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Zoology, first class honors, from the University of the West Indies, and a Master of Science in Coastal Zone Management and Marine Biology from Nova Southeastern University. Welcome. Thank you again for taking the time, Ms. Rangolan. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jillian. Good morning to everyone. I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. As Jillian had mentioned, we'll be discussing sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation. We have 4 panelists with us today: Dr. Susan Otuokon, Ms. Donna Blake, Mrs. Karen McDonald-Gale, and Mr. Andre Gooden. They will be presenting in that order, and what I will do is I will read a brief introduction for each panelist right before they speak. So let's start with Dr. Susan Otuokon. Susan is an experienced environmental consultant, 30 years of work experience to be specific. She's the executive director of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust, JCDT, an environmental non-governmental organization, delegated management of the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park and World Heritage Sites by the relevant government agencies. Dr. Otuokon was awarded her PhD in 2010 by the University of the West Indies for her thesis, Ecotourism and its Role as a Tool for Protected Area Management in the Caribbean, Case Studies from Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Otuokon has a Master of Science degree in Aquatic Resources Management from the University of London, and a BSc with honors from UWI. Her training and work experience include protected area and conservation planning and management, environmental and sustainable development education and communication, ecotourism, proposal writing, and fundraising. Dr. Otuokon has been involved in national planning and policy development for protected area management and tourism. She has served on a variety of boards ranging from the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, or NRCA, the Jamaica Institute of Environmental Professionals, JIEP, and the St. Hugh's Past Students Association. She played a lead role in the 2015 inscription of the Blue and Jonker Mountains on the UNESCO World Heritage List. In 2019, she was awarded the Bronze Musgrave Medal for Distinguished Eminence in Science by the Institute of Jamaica. Suzanne, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alison, and good morning, everyone. So the title of my presentation this morning is Sustainable Financing for Biodiversity Conservation, Myth or Mystery. As a protected area manager, biodiversity conservation has been the raison d'etre of my existence, followed very closely by ecosystem services conservation. And so sustainable financing, or how to make the funds for the conservation, because nothing is free, is one of the main things that I have been pursuing for at least the last 25 years of my professional life. So when we say sustainable financing, are we talking about the entities who are managing and conserving biodiversity and ecosystem services having access to financing every year, or is it that these entities and the work they do should be sustainably financed? And I think that sustainable financing has proven to be very elusive, and I hope today to share some of what I've learned and make recommendations for the way ahead. So in terms of the key points, and because time is limited, I'm not going to read everything that's on the screen. You see it there. I'm going to cover all of those things. And just very quickly, with respect to some photos, you know that protected areas are a critical component for biodiversity conservation and ecosystem services conservation toolkits. And so this is very sensitive, this pointer here. But if they're underfunded, the threats are very real. And underfunding can lead, of course, to insufficient capacity for effective management. But there are a wide variety of solutions to address this challenge. And they have been prescribed, and many books have been written, and papers and speeches given. But their success remains somewhat limited, I think, for many reasons. Let's look at some of the solutions prescribed. International funding sources, whether from government, bi- and multilateral, or from the big international NGOs, they all fund projects. And more recently, we've heard about carbon trading, and JCDT, where I work, has been exploring that. There are national funding sources as well, and these include, and perhaps I would say most importantly, are taxes. And there are a variety of things that can be taxed, and essentially this is as an exchange payment for ecosystem services. There are environmental funds, like the EFJ, where Alison works. But the key thing to remember is that there has got to be a source of the funds within that environmental fund in order for you to be able to access it. And the fund has to be maintained and grown. It doesn't just happen by itself, and that's a big problem when interest rates decline which is a global issue. And the challenge, of course, is that most donors don't fund endowments or trusts and other similar environmental funds. They want to fund projects and actions directly. I've also read about national lotteries, stock exchange, public donations. I'm not sure these have been much explored in Jamaica. I know that I spent at least 1 year trying to follow up with the national lottery here and wasn't successful, moved on to other things. Site level funding is another possible source, and here I've listed a range of options. User fees at the top, I think, are critical. They must be reasonably priced, not too low, not too high, and I believe that they should be two-tiered, resident and non-resident. All the others that are listed there, I'm most familiar with: cause-related marketing, corporate donations, individual donations, and site membership or friends of the Blue and John Crow Mountains, for example. Now, all of those, though, require major marketing and communications approaches and probably luck, good timing, good contact. So not as simple and straightforward. The others I'm not so familiar with. Now, why has sustainable financing evaded us? Is it a myth or just a mystery? I think it's a little bit of both. So first of all, much of the actual funding that is available is really for projects. And the fact is that to run an organization, run a protected area, you need recurrent operational costs to be funded, and in particular administrative costs, things like rent, utilities, accounting, and other management level staff. Otherwise, you simply can't get anything done. It's very difficult, and I would say really impossible to survive just on strict project funding. Many of the projects, we know this is a challenge, are short-term, and this is insufficient time for impact and change in behavior that we need to see. Another challenge is that oftentimes the full costs have not been properly estimated. So because you have been consistently funded by projects, a lot of your recurrent costs might be hidden in project funding, and when you're then asked, well, what are your recurrent costs, it becomes very difficult to identify. Another issue is that many of the entities managing protected areas don't have a business ethos, and I think more and more that's becoming critical and essential. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. The organizations are there in order to do something greater than just make money for profit and for individuals. However, you do need to have an understanding of a lot of business principles, and this is the case for government, NGOs by their very nature, and many foundations and so on. Many of the entities managing protected areas have limited capacity, not just the ones on the ground, but also the ones responsible, and that's human and other resources. There's a low level of will to contribute to protected area management in terms of funding of core recurrent operational costs. This is often seen as a quote-unquote waste of funds. How will the protected area ever become sustainable if we keep giving them funds for their rent, funds for their salaries, funds to maintain their vehicle? But these are essential costs. Another thing that donors might say, isn't government supposed to be paying these costs? But government is not. There's also a limited understanding of the realities on the ground, what it takes to actually manage a protected area. So, having been somewhat negative, how are we going to make it a reality? Here are my recommendations based on many, many years of experience. First of all, and I'm saying this at the ministry, government funding is essential for recurrent operational expenditure, not project related, but rather related to your management plan and your annual work plan. And kudos to NEPA, that's how they function, and we really appreciate it. But I would suggest at least 40 to 50% of the protected area's costs need to come from government funding. I would want to say more, but I'm trying to be realistic here. This is Jamaica. And this should be from taxes using the payment for ecosystems principle. But of course, government tends not to want to increase taxes, but it is essential for the survival of our nation. Increased management effectiveness, which we all want to see, requires a business model approach, and that requires money. money for the human resources with the qualifications, the training, the experience. As you know, NGOs are operated mostly by people on the very low salary scale. You need financial management. The big projects JCDT has right now, the level of administrative and financial management that's needed requires a full-time senior accountant and several accounting clerks, plus other people to deal with some of the administrative requirements. Ecotourism is an option for most protected areas, and there's so many different types of ecotourism. It can be related to research ecotourism, but there needs to be user fees legislated. I have found this essential. And then other revenue sources as well. But remember, this is also going to require expenditure also. It's not just income that goes directly to the protected area. And I think donors of various kinds will continue to be essential. I think that membership friends programs are important. They might not generate a lot of money, but they're essential for you to have a strong constituency. And this does require funding to support it. And then, of course, wrapping up, innovation. Keep looking and thinking outside the box and keep experimenting. And finally, partners and collaboration. We can't do it alone. So, in summary, to be a reality, sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation requires funding of salaries and other recurrent operational expenditure, including admin, accounting, and management personnel from government and other sources, in addition to funding of projects, short, medium, and long term, as well as a variety of other approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. As usual, you have given us quite a bit of insight into what it's actually like as an NGO on the ground co-managing such a large and important protected area. Next, we will have Miss Donna Blake, and a little bit about Donna before she gets into her presentation. Ms. Blake has 25 years of public policy, governance, and collaborative management experience from within the Government of Jamaica and the Nature Conservancy, creating and supporting the creation of the framework for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity through advocating for and participating in biodiversity policy, legislation, and appropriate governance mechanisms. She has hands-on experience in proposal development, project management and implementation, training, public education and awareness raising, and policy and legislation analysis and development. Ms. Blake has a record of working in partnership with all levels of individuals, including donor institutions and individuals, government ministers, junior and senior staff in ministries, departments, and agencies, community groups, private sector businesses, and non-governmental organizations. NGO partnerships, which have always been a feature of her work, now include a humanitarian NGO, the Jamaica Red Cross, with which TNC is jointly implementing a project funded by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, called Resilient Islands by Design. Experience with sustainable funding for conservation has been ongoing for more than 10 years and has taken various forms in that time. Ms. Blake is the mother of 2 young women. She is also a gardener who prefers plants not grown for flowers, but for spectacular leaf color, shape, and or texture, or drought and neglect tolerance. I can certainly relate to the latter. She thrives when her plants and children thrive. Donna, over to you.
Thank you, Alison. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Donna Blake. I'm the Jamaica Program Director for the Nature Conservancy, and today I am representing the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica. I am one of their directors, and I'm going to talk to you about our perspective on sustainable financing. Declaring protected areas is one important means of protecting, conserving, and managing our natural national resources, the biodiversity and the ecosystems they create, and thereby the benefits that we derive from these ecosystems. The government of Jamaica has declared over 350 sites, and in an analysis in 2010, approximately $8.4 million was found to be the cost of managing those sites for just basic protected area management. In contrast, $6.4 million a year is provided from government subventions, ad hoc projects from international groups, foundations, local private sector. So there you see there is a gap, $2 million a year. Experience over multiple decades shows that for protected area management to be successful, and you just heard some of that from Dr. Aturkan, the ad hoc projects, while beneficial, don't capture all of the needs for managing a protected area, and hence the term sustainable financing was utilized to describe the need for long-term, reliable, designed to manage large amounts of funds in
actual funding,
sufficient funds. In the financial and corporate sector, sustainable financing is used differently, and you'll see here two definitions. One says investment decisions that take into account the environmental, social, and governance factors. But conservationists view it slightly differently. This is where conservation trust funds come in. Their role is to provide this additional income for protected area managers and to provide some diversity to the source of funds. Here are some of the features of conservation trust funds. Their goal is really to provide sustainable, long-term, reliable, sufficient funding. They are set up utilizing global best practices for conservation trust funds to enable continuity of efforts. They're structured to receive funds from a variety of sources and allocate benefits out to recipients rapidly. They're positioned to mobilize resources that smaller NGOs and governments may not have access to. They're designed to manage large amounts of funds in perpetuity and through careful and judicious financial management. And they themselves need to have a dedicated and reliable source of funds. So how do the trust funds contribute to sustainability or sustainable financing of protected areas? Generally, they're set up with an endowment or some kind of established financial mechanism that provides resources year after year. So for example, the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which you'll hear a little bit about more from Karen, is an endowment that has a Jamaica sub-account, and the annual interest from that endowment is channeled into the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica for supporting Jamaica's protected area sites. So the NCTFJ is a not-for-profit organization registered in Jamaica in 2014. That's when we began operation. I mentioned we're supported by the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which is itself a conservation trust fund. Other donors to the NCTFJ include the Nature Conservancy, the United Nations Development Programme, the Global Environment Facility, the National Environment and Planning Agency, and the ministries responsible for the environment. So what are some of the actions that the NCTFJ has taken to itself become sustainable? There have been significant outreach and requests for support for the NCTFJ and its mission made to local, private sector and foundations and industries and organizations seeking to diversity and gain support for protected areas management. Despite how important biodiversity is for our way of life in general, we've had extremely limited success in this regard. And to date, our biggest gap has been our really lack of a good relationship with the private sector, and we're hoping to build that going forward. But one successful initiative has been that we have gained a grant from the Inter-American Foundation, and the primary goal of that grant is to build the capacity for managing protected areas within the protected area management entities themselves. We gave out grants. Our first call was in 2020. Approximately US $10,000 was granted. Our second call was just completed this week, and approximately $20,000 US has been given to local protected area managements. And you'll see the call for proposals focused on organizations directly involved in the management of protected areas or operating in protected areas and supporting activities that contribute to the long-term sustainability of protected areas. And you'll see proposals and pitches were made for various types of financial mechanisms that are working well in the Caribbean and elsewhere. On this slide, you'll see an example of some mechanisms which focus on the tourism industry. In many parts of the world, there are specific taxes, which you heard before are one mechanism that are utilized. There are, in the Caribbean, St. Lucia has an opt-out contribution whereby tourists may decide they do not wish to pay this. And this is $2 US per night per room. And you'll see it ranges up to about $5 or $6 in some places, and those are mandatory. The eco tax, the environment fee, the green tax, and the green tax surcharge. Those are, you don't have the option not to pay. Those are just mandatory. Those funds flow into protected area management in those countries. In Jamaica, a willingness to pay survey was conducted in 2013. We found that 98% of the visitors were willing to pay $5 US or more, and 80% were willing to pay $10 US or more to support the natural and cultural environment. However, despite sharing that information with the relevant entities, we have not yet been successful in negotiating such a mechanism to be implemented in Jamaica. We are hopeful still, though. So, for the NCTFJ to be successful in its mission, and here we are talking about biodiversity conservation, how do we fund that? Where is the money going to come from? I repeat some of what Dr. Turkan said. This is a lot about partnership and collaboration. And we see scaling up as a critical piece of that. So we have to strengthen the existing partnerships we have with Government of Jamaica entities. And I mentioned the support from the Ministries for the Environment, the National Environment and Planning Agency. These have been strong partners of the NCTFJ from the very beginning. Now we need to deepen those partnerships, I would say, and show and realize the value from managing protected areas for their multiple benefits, including climate change adaptation and mitigation. And further, I would say, explore the potential for accessing new markets, such as carbon credits as a source of, another source of diversified revenue for protected areas. So the NCTFJ is fostering mutually beneficial partnerships and collaborations, more push for private sector in this phase, looking at their corporate social responsibility as a possible avenue or other means to meet private sector needs. So what does the NCTFJ bring to the table to those partnerships? We bring a potential for matching funds, project evaluation and monitoring, and those are just a couple of benefits. Finally, the NCTFJ seeks to scale up, as I mentioned, and replicate projects at protected area sites throughout the protected area system in Jamaica through multiple and diverse and collaborative means, and we're definitely open to innovation and talking about things we haven't yet tried. We invite you to collaborate with us. Let's talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Donna. And Donna took it to a national level. So we've gone from local on the ground with Suzanne to national level conservation trust funds with Donna. And we are now going to go to a regional level trust fund. As Donna mentioned in her presentation, we're going to go to Karen McDonald-Gale. And a little bit about Karen before she gets into her presentation. With over 20 years of experience in environmental project design and grant making, Mrs. McDonald-Gale is a regional leader with specific expertise in conservation trust funds, CTF management, in the Caribbean. She held the role of USAID Jamaica Mission Environment Officer and Project Manager before moving on to the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, where she served as CEO for 6.5 years and where I had the privilege of working with her. In her current capacity as Conservation Finance Manager at the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, CBF, Karen manages the endowment fund and coordinates the development and continued consolidation of the CTF partners through the Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture, or CSFA. Based in Jamaica, Karen revels in being West Indian and loves that her job takes her outside the boardroom to the many natural treasures of the Caribbean and beyond. Karen joins us by Zoom. Karen, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope you are all seeing and hearing well. My presentation, sorry, let's go back to the beginning. I am going to modify what I say based on what we've heard before. So thank you, Alison, very much for the welcome. And to my fellow panelists, good to see you. Sorry, I'm not there in person. I look forward to joining back with you. I think Suzanne's presentation was spot on and very, very insightful. All aspects of the work that we are doing well displayed and well put forward as to the issues that we have. And what I want to present is a little bit on what we do at the regional level and to have a little bit of the discussion of what that means in the Jamaican context. So very quickly, I will take you through, and I think many of you in the audience know this well, the work of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. Our mission is to ensure continuous funding for conservation and sustainable development in the Caribbean. We are focused on creating opportunities for Caribbean conservation through Conservation Trust Fund, management and development, as well as through other sources. We consider ourselves an umbrella environmental fund and a conservation trust fund, and you've heard that defined, but also a space and a flexible structure to have opportunities for other types of funding and investment in the Caribbean. Currently, the CBF manages over $125 million US dollars in funding on a range of projects right now focused on conservation finance and climate change. And this gives you a little bit more of that breakdown. The conservation finance program is anchored by our endowment fund. And that's the fund that I manage. It started with commitments of $69.5 million and is expected of an endowment fund due to investments, etc. Our market value is now at $80 million and growing. And right now we are targeting and working, and we have sub-accounts for 12 countries in the Caribbean. You will have to do your own flag testing and make sure you know the flags of the region. And we are aiming to work with other countries in the Caribbean, other territories, but also other styles of secretariats and operational substation entities. For example, we are in conversations with the Caribbean Biological Corridor as to how we can support their secretariat and operational structure, as well as we've had discussions on ideas for invasive alien species at a Caribbean level and supporting a secretariat structure there through sustainable and constant sources of funding for that type of mechanism. We also have and are working on other types of programs. The climate change program has a sinking fund, which gives more traditional grants in the area of ecosystem-based adaptation, which EDA you see there, and that is at $50 million and works with some of the countries listed, but also works at the regional level. And this says 2021, but we will be pushing to 2022. We will be rolling out a circular economy sinking fund that will also give grants specifically to countries in the Caribbean doing work on areas of circular economy development, and preventing and removing marine litter will be the target of that program. The Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture that we speak about is a way of putting together all of that in one package, working with the countries of the region and the programs that the CBF has already started and others that we will be doing, really thinking about some of the questions that Suzanne and Donna have already posed about how do we make this possible for the countries of the Caribbean, building on our network, building on our partnerships, building on working together to have opportunities for conservation finance and conservation projects that can be done throughout the region. In particular, as we have heard already, and I won't spend a lot of time, we work through the concept of conservation trust funds. You will get the full set of slides, so given what Donna has presented, I will not go back through them, but to say that our support to conservation trust funds, to the NCTFJ in particular, and the other 10 signed funds throughout the region that are working with the CBF, is to help them with the design of their conservation trust funds, to provide materials and documents, to provide templates, and really to make sure that across the region we are creating the same opportunities for trust fund management and conservation management across the board. One of the things we are quick to point out is this is not a quick process. For those of you who have followed the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica, we have many phases to go through, and really part of the process is allowing those conservation trust funds in each of the countries that we are working in to build their own independent autonomous trust funds, able to do what makes sense for their own countries. And this is something I will go back to in terms of how we share what we want to do going forward, and answering some of, or at least attempting to answer some of the questions Suzanne has asked. Just in terms of where we are, we started with all of them in the startup or early operations phase, so we're very proud that we now have 7 consolidated trust funds, including the CBF itself, which started when we started this process, and 4 in early operations. And the thinking outside the box is, I think Suzanne used the phrase, the idea of what are we talking about for these sustainable finance mechanisms? So beyond the grants and beyond the regular types of funding, what are we looking for? And there are some examples there. I think the key to the discussion is also thinking outside the box in how we are managing and coordinating the projects that the ideas, I should say, that we are thinking of for these finance mechanisms. And I will talk a little bit more about the governance structure that goes with it. For the architecture itself, what we want to present is the idea that we can move quickly, that we are nimble, that we have a flexible structure, that we can reach the islands of the Caribbean and the countries of the Caribbean, and indeed any partner in the Caribbean. We work, the National Conservation Trust Funds, NCTFJ included, has a range of their own board members, which is mixed between government representatives and non-government representatives. But in the end, those funds are non-government majority and able to move quickly. The idea of the regional architecture is that we are then able to share that ability to move quickly through the trust funds, but also as the CBF itself in getting work done on the ground in the countries throughout the region. And really to work with a range of possibilities of replicating financial mechanisms that we might discover, learn about throughout the region for the conservation trust fund. So whatever, if something is working and looks like it could work in a Jamaica setting, to make sure that we're able to share that opportunity in what we're doing. I was asked by the organizers to quickly mention the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. It is the basis of where CBF came from. The CCI had a challenge of creating 20% of marine protected areas by 2020. 5 of the countries we worked with did reach that target, the others didn't. But as you can see here, there was also the idea of partnerships, which has come across many a time, working with both private sector companies as well as governments and other organizations. And that was the presentation that I had put together. What I want to add here for the Jamaican context, and as you heard from Alison, I have worked both with the EFJ and now working with the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica, that the idea of what we need to do to consider sustainable financing in the Jamaican context to build and to answer the questions that have been asked by Dr. Tuakan really revolve around Jamaica coordinating among itself, the government of Jamaica with all stakeholders involved in protected areas management at a very round table where you hear what Dr. Tuakan has said in terms of needs, as well as other aspects of the work that needs to be done in terms of creating opportunities for sustainable financing. And that you also hear the comments of the funders and the donors as to the value of non-government involvement and balance that with the work that needs to be done. And that the wonderful work that has been done and continues to be done by both the ministry and NEPA. Jamaica is not the only regional country, Caribbean country, with more than one National Conservation Trust Fund. And the key to it is really going to be that coordination and very hard discussion about moving forward with ideas that can work and creating the opportunities for the conservation trust funds, the protected areas that have been delegated responsibility to really begin to share their lessons learned, because they have amazing lessons learned. They have had amazing projects and amazing opportunities, and to share those lessons learned in terms of ways forward. I leave you with that to think about and for discussions. In terms of the CBF, you would have heard that one of the things that we do is promote the idea of the sustainable finance mechanisms. Indeed, the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica will in 1 year, have to demonstrate some matching funds that they have earned on their own to meet the contributions given by the CBF to continue this concept of sustainable financing and possibilities. And I look forward to continuing discussion and continuing to help in whatever possibilities we can think about for the Caribbean scenario. The CBF, in addition, continues to design and receive funding for capacity development in finance and mechanisms and the design of financing mechanisms, and those are and will be shared with the National Conservation Trust Funds, including the NCTFJ. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Karen. That mention of coordinating and the need to coordinate is certainly something that we've heard many times over, and we continue to hear that sometimes we do operate too frequently in silos. I was heartened to realize, and I'm not surprised quite frankly, that there were very common threads throughout all three of our presentations thus far. Now, if the title of the presentation or the title of the conversation we're about to have holds, I do believe that at least one of those threads will continue. However, we're going to be getting this one from a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to welcome Mr. Andre Gooden, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him before I hand over to him. He actually comes to us as the Group Business Development Manager from the Jamaica Stock Exchange, or JSE. So Mr. Gooden brings a wealth of experience, 30 years to be exact, in the areas of portfolio management, investment counseling, financial planning, commercial banking, stockbroking, and project management. He has held several senior positions within the financial sector in Jamaica and New York in the area of banking and investments. His responsibilities at the JSE include identifying and developing strategic business relationships locally, regionally, and internationally, and to take the lead in the development of new business opportunities that support the overall growth strategy of the JSE Group. He received his Bachelor of Science degree in Marketing from the State University of New York and MBA from the University of New Orleans. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce and also the chair of the Jamaica Conference Board. Mr. Gooden is also an active member of the Rotary Club of Kingston since 2003. And Andre joins us via Zoom. Andre, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and it is my honor to be associated with this panel of biodiversity professionals today. I have heard so far a lot about sustainability and about the need for long-term commitment to financing of biodiversity projects, green projects, environmentally friendly initiatives. And having heard that, I am heartened to say that I believe that the Jamaica Stock Exchange has at least one rung on the ladder towards achieving that objective of long-term financing. I'll just take a little background on the initiatives of the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange initiatives, and then a little more about green bonds, which we hope will be one of the catalysts to sustainable financing. The United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange initiative provides a platform for exploring how stock exchanges, along with their key market players, can enhance corporate transparency on ESG issues and to encourage sustainable investment. It is a collaborative initiative, really, between the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and the United Nations Environmental Program of Finance Initiative, UNEP-FI, and United Nations Global Impact and the Principles for Responsible Investment. As I mentioned, Principles for Responsible Investment. It is a global trend now that investors investing in certain companies, whether listed on a stock exchange or not, want to know not just about how the company handles their financial capital, but also their socio-cultural influences, policies and procedures, and their environmental objectives as well. So it is really very important. The sustainable development, the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange initiatives focuses on mainly 6 of the sustainable development goals, being SDG 5, which is boardroom diversity and gender equality, SME growth and sustainable development, that's SDG 8, SDG 10, which is security market regulation, and the reason we are here, SDG 12, reporting on environmental, social, and governance, and 13, climate action, green finance, and 17, partnerships for sustainable and transparent capital markets. So today, the Sustainable Stock Exchange initiatives has partnered with 100 stock exchanges around the world, basically to infiltrate sustainable initiatives in capital markets. Happily to report that the Jamaica Stock Exchange became a signed partner to the SSC initiative in 2014. Our commitment to this initiative is that we voluntarily commit through dialogue with investors, companies, regulators to promote long-term sustainable investment in and improve environmental, social, and corporate governance disclosure and performance among companies listed on our exchange. The requirement that has been put in place for our listed companies is that in their annual reports, they have to speak to their corporate social responsibility activities, and also a growing demand now for them to include as well their ESG activities. So on that basis, we are holding the listed companies more accountable now for protection of the environment. So what are we trying to do as a partner with this initiative is to strengthen the Jamaica Stock Exchange's commitment through implementation of sustainable policies and practices, ESG reporting standards, and of course, development of green investment products. What we're actually doing is 2 phases running concurrently, transforming our internal operations and culture while supporting the wider community, and 2, transforming the financial ecosystem, which is where the green bonds come in. But internally, some of the things that the stock exchange has done to really have a begin and continue a journey of environmental impact is, first of all, we converted our main building to solar, and approximately right now 40% of our energy use is from solar power, and this has resulted in an average of 50% reduction in energy costs. Internally also, we as a sustainable stock exchange member mentioned before, we affirm leading the market by example, and we have implemented an internal recycling program, and that is just started this year. Since March, the company has recycled 985 pounds of plastic and 6,700 pounds of paper. We have also established, as mentioned, as a listed company on the exchange as well, ESG reporting and standards. We have reconfigured our workstations in compliance with COVID-19 protocols while maintaining the high service levels. And we did a detailed occupational health and safety review and implementation measures to improve the general safety of our employees in the working environment. And renovation of one of our buildings has included green design recommendations from local professionals. That's internal. Externally now, we are working with the Jamaica Social Stock Exchange, which is a subsidiary of the group, which is encouraging and enabling the entire Jamaican economy in promoting social capital investments as a critical pillar in economic development, and also the Green Bond Initiative. We have partnered with the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal and Climate Change to develop a framework for the listing of green bonds on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. This is a 24-month project, and at the end of which we anticipate, which will be a year from now, there'll be at least the initial listing of green bonds on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, which will provide certainly long-term financing for green projects. Green bonds are really debt instruments whose proceeds are put specifically towards green projects, environmental projects. The objective being, of course, to develop a platform which leverages the capital market as a source of finance for ESG projects. What types of projects are we talking about? Wastewater management, recycling, whether paper, glass, protection of green spaces, treatment of waste, energy, efficiency. Basically creating more alternatives as well for investors, and to attract persons who may not be investors now, who have an environmental consciousness about them, to participate in capital markets through green bonds. Firms will raise capital through their projects, and the projects will be listed, and the investors will be paid through the income streams of the bonds. Of course, this will contribute meaningfully towards the United Nations SDGs, and there will be significant monitoring and evaluation using the existing framework of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. We feel that our participation in this initiative as a sustainable stock exchange will certainly propel us to be the champion for sustainability and climate action in the capital market. We will also be broadening market awareness and participation in green financing and environmental preservation. And of course, green bonds foster a greater level of transparency and institutional accountability in the delivery of sustainable development, because the existing framework of the Jamaica Stock Exchange is one of strict monitoring and evaluation. So we, through the broker dealers, they will identify entities that have green projects worthy of finance, package those projects and offer them to investors. And then those securities that are created will be listed on the market. That is the easy part. The hard part, which is where we will be using the stock exchange's regulatory framework now and monitoring framework, is to ensure that funds raised for green projects are invested as such. So there'll be a strict reporting environment as currently exists for listing companies, where the progress on the investments will be reported, and we will be monitoring and evaluating how the funds are being invested, and to ensure, obviously, that the funds are being used for the intended purpose. If should there be a situation where 100% of the funds raised are being initially put towards development and monitoring of green sustainable projects, and that changes along the way, certainly it will come into question, and we will have to take the necessary action to ensure that the issuing entity uses the funds for the purpose indicated. So using the existing framework of the Jamaica Stock Exchange regulatory mechanism, we feel it's a good opportunity to manage and promote investing in green projects for continued and sustained biodiversity. What we're also looking to do through the Jamaica Stock Exchange eCampus is develop ourselves as the hub in the Caribbean, particularly the Caribbean, for anything green. So we will be conducting continuous seminars, training, capacity building in the region. So if there are other entities in the region, whether stock exchanges, whether individual entities looking to establish themselves as pioneers in the green space, we will be able and available to assist in conducting all of the necessary sensitization, training, hopefully by that time, certification as well through the Jamaica Stock Exchange campus for anybody who wants to go there and put theory into practice. So that is how I believe the quest for long-term sustainable financing will begin. And we all know that there is a significant amount of funding out there available globally for green projects. But I'm challenging the local market space and the regional market space to not let the first green bond listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange come from an external entity. Let it be a green project located right here in Jamaica. And the August panel here assembled, I know, will have a series of these identified already, and we will collaborate through the broker-dealer community to package these investments into attractive bonds, which can be used to stimulate investing in the environment. That is my presentation, and I thank you very much for listening and for inviting us to be here.
Connections in your presentation, and I was also very heartened and interested to hear about the green bonds. Funny thing, one of the questions that I had jotted down was who is involved in that green bonds conversation, but I think you just issued an invitation at the end of that presentation, so that's excellent, that there will be the opportunity to have further involvement and conversations about how that can be structured and where that can possibly lead. So we are now on to our question and answer section, or further discussion section. And I know we have a few questions coming in, so if you have not already submitted your question, I encourage you to do so. And in the interim, and if you have a specific panelist that you would wish to answer your question, you can also indicate that. In the interim, I'm going to start with this question from Joanna. Is a debt for nature swap an option in a country like Jamaica? What sort of considerations would make that kind of arrangement possible? Now, I'm not a panelist. I will say a debt for nature swap is an option, and debt for nature swaps have taken place in Jamaica. However, what I will do is I will invite our panelists, and I'm going to specifically ask Donna if she would address that question, please.
I'll give it my best shot. So we have had 2 debt for nature swaps in Jamaica. One which created the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, and the other which created the Forest Conservation Fund, which is rolled into the EFJ. So there are actually 2 mechanisms. 2 debt for nature swaps have already been negotiated, and those proceeds now are actually managed by the EFJ very effectively. And programs go on, and grants are given out. I think even a couple of weeks ago, some new grants were given out by the EFJ under that mechanism. I don't feel qualified to speak about what's going on right now in terms of whether a debt for nature swap is possible. That would have to be something the Ministry of Finance indicates to us. Is there applicable debt? Is there a willing country to which we are a debtor who would like to negotiate this kind of agreement with us? So there's a multiplicity of things that need to be considered in order for that question to be properly answered. So I can't say we have a history of doing it. Whether or not we would go forward is something the government of Jamaica would need to properly address.
Thank you very much for that, Donna. I'm not sure if any of our other panelists, who I know also have a certain amount of experience, would like to add anything to that. Okay. What we'll do is okay, thanks, Karen. Go ahead.
Sorry, there's just to add as well that Don is right. I think a lot has to do with how it wants to approach it. The other, just to say that there are a range of debt swap mechanisms now. We started it with it being very bilateral, government to the country. The government that is giving the debt to the country. So the 2 that we have are with the US government. But there are now a range of possibilities and a range of debt swap options, including debt for climate swap, debt for other reductions. So the possibility always exists, and it would be for the powers that be in Jamaica to do the explanations for moving forward.
Thank you for that, Karen. Okay, our second question. What mechanisms are in place to ensure that the issuing entities use profits for sustainable initiatives? I guess that one may be directed to the
I'll take that one.
Concept of, you're right, the concept of the green bonds, etc., that Andre presented. Yes, thank you, Andre.
Right. I mean, and with listed companies, I did mention that the requirements of listed companies now presenting their annual reports has to include a section on their CSR and their ESG activities. And you can't really make it up. It has to be tangibly represented in the, not just the financial reports, but the operational reports too. And there, in fact, in some instances, there are subcommittees of some listed boards who bear the responsibility of ensuring, especially those who work closely with environmental aspects, manufacturing, energy, etc., that they really stamp their footprint and make it known publicly what initiatives they have in place and what progress is being made. So the system of accountability is being done through the stock exchanges and the reports that come to us on these entities.
Okay, thank you for that response, Andre. To follow up on that question, though, and that response, understanding that there is this reliance on the annual reports, etc., is there any, and understanding that annual reports often do have external audit information, etc., included in them, which would also contribute to this ESG reporting. Is there anything that specifies, or have you seen any tendencies for many of these companies to also, I'm not sure that audit would be the right word, but to look into their supply chains to see if those persons or those entities from which they are receiving supplies, etc., are also adhering to some of these principles. Is that in place here as yet, or is that something that we're working towards? Can you speak to that?
That is what is being worked towards. Yes, because if you're going to practice it, you have to preach it as well and demand the same thing of all your business partners. So yes, I don't think it is in black and white yet, but certainly as a purchasing entity, if I am a consumer of your business and I'm seeing inefficient practices and things that negatively affect the whole ecosystem happening, I would certainly reconsider how I invest my money. And as such, as we lead more towards more global awareness for environmental issues, this will become more and more prominent. And if your entity is in a position where it is not operating, and it is operating in a way that will continue to degrade the environment, quite obviously, your business is going to be left behind if it is not transformed into a space where biodiversity and environmental awareness and friendliness is part of your necessary DNA. So it starts with, charity really begins at home. So if you practice it internally, you have to demand the same of all your suppliers and business partners. And that's what we see happening right now at the Jamaica Stock Exchange. So we're hoping and expecting that will replicate itself across the ecosystem.
Okay, thank you for that, Andre. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. So what I will do is I'm going to ask a question, and I will ask each of our panelists just to give me 1 sentence, 2 sentences to close out. So my question to each of you is, having presented the information to us from each of your experiences, each of your perspectives, what do you see if you tomorrow had to wake up and take the next step that you think would potentially be the lowest hanging fruit, the most logical step, the most efficient step, whatever it is, however you want to define it? What would that step be? So I am going to start. Okay, you'll get a little bit of extra time on that one. I'm going to actually go in the same order that we had presented. Okay. So I'm going to ask Dr. Otuokon, Suzanne, to take the first go at it. And once she's finished, we'll hand over to Donna, then to Karen, and then to you, Andre. Okay?
Yeah, I think we are headed generally in the right direction in terms of a number of the things mentioned here that I had mentioned as things that need to happen. So, for example, the JCDT receives, or used to before COVID, about 25% of our budget for managing the Blue and John Crow Mountains through the NRCA, through NEPO. COVID has totally devastated that. We're probably at less than half. So if they can get back up there, and I suggested 40 to 50% is where government, I think, really needs to go for protected areas. I would love to see us in a situation like Germany, where protected areas are fully funded by government. But realistically, I don't know if we can get there. So that's one thing. And the second thing I think, and it's something that JCDT is pushing through right now, is to upgrade all aspects of our work with respect to admin, accounting, looking at our processes, doing business process analysis, so that we can look at where our inefficiencies are and ensure that we are much more effective. So oftentimes protected areas organization might be familiar with the MET scorecard, but that tends to look at some of the big picture things. But what's behind that? How do you implement certain things in the office, in the back office? And we are trying to ensure that we operate in a much more efficient manner, because we want to save funds and work in a more effective manner.
Okay, thank you for that, Suzanne. And I do have a follow-up question for you after everyone has responded. Go ahead, please, Donna.
So I'm going to keep, before we, I would say from local to maybe national. I'd be very interested to take up both Andre and Karen on this idea of collaboration and coordination. The National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica, and indeed my organization, the Nature Conservancy, is very interested in moving to those next steps, defining what they are as a group, looking together at where our individual strengths are, what do we pull on, who are our partners in the government, who can we bring on in the private sector, who are those willing investors, and to really begin that dialogue and drill down into, so this is a good idea, and then what, and who implements, and who monitors that implementation, and so on. And so I see that there needs to be a process. We outline our stakeholders, we have our dialogue, and then we chart the way forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Donna. Karen, over to you.
So yes, I think that the answer from Yad was already given, and Donna echoed it. I think from the regional perspective, it would be good to understand the questions that we would want to answer for making these finance mechanisms real. So we know we want to approach private sector, and I think we have some good private sector entities at the table, but I think that hard-hitting discussion of what do you really want to hear from us to be able to create those finance mechanisms, those long-term financing mechanisms, would be key. So that list of questions from both private sector and government that starts to, so that we can help with answering them in an effective manner as to what would work for finance mechanisms.
Andre, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I can't point to one thing, but what I will say, I have a couple of things. One, legislation. We probably need to put more energy into incentivizing issuers and investors to support environmental projects that have long-term effects. So tax incentives, for example, there must be some further consideration of the tax incentives. I mean, we can rely on the conscience of investors who realize the importance of green investing, but at the same time, they may still want to know what's in it for us lately. So the first thing I'd consider is incentivizing such projects further. A second one I thought about was further enhancement of the percentage of the public purse that goes towards specific environmental objectives. But then I said, Dr. Clark may not like that one. So the other one to consider maybe is give us a timeline for the reduction in the development, in the reliance on fossil fuels. If we can import, our oil bill is frightening. If we can have a timeline for the next 10 years, let's say, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels across the region, those funds can be diverted into specific environmental projects for the same long-term gain, rather than, on consumption and combustion. So those are the two things. And the last one I would mention is further consideration and enhancement of our building codes to reflect more environmental friendliness. We see buildings going up all over the island now, and I am not sure how many of them are considered fully the environmental effects of what they're doing. How many of them are you relying on solar energy? How many of them are relying on other things that can, you know, how they're going to manage wastewater, etc., so that you can ensure that going forward, if these buildings are new now, 50 years from now, they're probably still going to be around, and with the structure and the modus of the operation of these buildings now, if it is not set out early at the beginning, then you'll be further eroding the environment instead of contributing to the environmental effectiveness.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Andre. I feel like he's been sitting in on all the different meetings and hearing everything that's being said. So thank you very much for that. Okay,
if I could,
go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, just a quick jump in from the regional and global perspective of the balance for the government-based incentives with other types of incentives, and the real thinking through, you know, the real reality check is somebody there, Donna can tell you how long the Fisheries Act and the changes and the incentives took to come into place. Environment and is not high on that agenda. That's there for government and government aspects, and the push and the drive for that comes from outside of government, either global citizens, global private sector, etc. So there is a balance to be had with the types of incentives, whether they're legally based or whether we work on them from a different angle that does not necessarily require the lead of the governments of the countries. And there have been good examples throughout the globe.
Okay, thank you for that addition, Karen, certainly. Okay, so I'm going to steal a few more minutes, and there was a question that came in for Suzanne. So some of this has already been touched on, but I'm going to ask, and you can take it from there. Apart from the recommendation that the GOJ provide up to 50% to finance protected areas, are other options considered, such as payment for ecosystem services and engagement of protected areas in the carbon trading market? What are your views?
So let me just go back to my presentation where I said, and there's no one solution for any issue, challenge, problem in the world. So it's not just government. That's why I said 40 to 50% is my kind of ideal. 100 would be ideal in an ideal world. We don't live in an ideal world. So I said that donors will continue to be important, whether those are the conservation trust funds, etc. Individual donations, and not just donations of cash, but donations of time and skills. JCDT recently started our Blue Mountain Volunteer Corps, and it has been challenging through COVID, but it has been working, and we're happy with that. In terms of carbon trading, JCDT has been almost a year in looking at that as a possibility for us, and of course, you know that nationally Jamaica is looking at that more generally as well. Our focus was on the voluntary private sector market. And our feasibility study, I can't let any cats out of bags. It's not completed as yet. But the reality is, as I try to emphasize, there's a cost in everything. So you're going to have ecotourism and try to generate income from an industry, the tourism industry. But there are costs. You have to have someone to collect the tickets and the ticket money at the gate, and we're trying to improve our efficiencies there with, you know, having debit card, credit card, online purchase of these tickets and so on. But there's a cost to everything, so that somehow has to be balanced. So similar with the carbon trading, sounds like a great idea, but there are also costs associated with measuring, with monitoring how much carbon you're actually saving. So we are going to have to take a closer look at all of that and put all the figures together. But it's sustainable financing, I think we've heard today for sure, is not just one solution, but working together across a variety of solutions and coordinating those.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Suzanne. And in addition to it not being one solution, we've also repetitively heard the emphasis on the need to collaborate and to partner and to have those necessary conversations around the big table so that the various stakeholders can be engaged as they need to be. Their inputs can be heard, those inputs can be taken into account, and the way forward can be planned very carefully. The systems that would need to be in place to ensure the success of whatever mechanisms we choose for sustainable financing would need to be carefully considered. As Susan has just said, there is a cost associated with these things, and those things need to be carefully considered in terms of going forward and putting them in place. And at the end of the day, making sure that these things are actionable, having the responsible, whoever it is, whether it's an agency, an individual, an organization, ensuring that those responsible individuals are clear on the role that they need to play so that these things can be effectively executed going forward. So, in closing, I will say thank you very, very much to all of our panelists, and a hearty thank you, and I believe I can say congratulations to the Ministry for this hosting of the second National Biodiversity Conference. It has been my pleasure to moderate this panel. Thank you for the stolen time, Jillian, and I now hand over to you.
Thank you, Alison. And we had a very good, thank you very much, a very good discussion on a very key national issue on sustainable financing for biodiversity conservation. And it's a topic that we will continue to have discussions on, and more importantly, to see if we can implement some of those recommendations going forward. So the partnerships that we talked about, we will have to explore them actively to see how best we can make the best solution for Jamaica in terms of financing our protected areas in particular. We are going to have a very short break in terms of a video. So we asked you a 5-minute break. We will show you another informative video. And then we're going to come back because we have to announce the YEEP 2021 awardees, again to thank the Grace Kennedy Foundation for its continued support. And we're also going to officially launch our poster competition for the National Biodiversity Conference. So a 5-minute break where you'll view an informative video, and then we come back to have our announcements. Thank you.
Fisheries play an important role in Jamaica's economic development. In 2017, the fishing industry contributed $79.76 million to the gross domestic product, with total exports valued at $12.12 million. Since then, catches have decreased and aquaculture production has declined. This is due to overfishing and the effects of climate change, such as warming sea temperatures, storm surges, and rising sea levels.
The fish migrate to the deeper water. So where I could catch some fish, I catch no more fish there.
In Green Island, a small town in Hanover, on the northwest coast of Jamaica, fish were getting smaller and less. So the Green Island Friendly Fisher Folks Cooperative Society diversified their income with commercial oyster farming. Their project proposal was approved under the Special Climate Change Adaptation Fund, SCAF, on behalf of the Adaptation Program and Financing Mechanism for the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, AP and FM.
EFJ are the fund administrators for the Special Climate Change Adaptation Fund. We ask the enablers of Community Advancement Initiative projects, ECAPI, to provide monitoring and support services. So ECAPI has been working along with them, along with the Ministry Fisheries Division, to help to advance the project. The main activities include the setting up of 20 oyster racks using bamboo. They have been exposed to training at the Bowden Hatchery in St. Thomas, and as well as the seeding and maintenance of their oyster rack and the updating of their business plan.
Since the establishment in 2017, one of the things that we have been doing with them is supplying them with oyster spots, which they grow out and sell to the tourism market. We have also provided support in terms of monthly or bi-monthly visits to assist in monitoring water quality, because oysters are generally eaten raw. Generally, the growth period is about 6 months before we sell them to the market.
We get them from there small. We monitor them twice per week. Our first harvesting was 150 dozen. We bring to agriculture show in Montpellier, and from there we get a good result, because when we go there, wow, they were excited.
We sell 70 dozen, and right after that we get the order for 30 dozen from a hotel. They enjoy the taste of it and said it's #1, and start to take 30 dozen every week until when it was coming to the last of that crop, they asked for 60 dozen. So we said, yes, we're gonna bingo. And this crop now is where we were looking on to make the group a force to reckon with.
They have employed up to 62 persons from they have started. There are some young persons who have gained employment, and as a result of that, they can assist themselves with their school supplies. The fisher folks as well, they are able to provide for their families through the sale of the oysters.
It makes me feel so proud to know that we do something for our community out of that little bit. If it wasn't for the EFJ project, we wouldn't be able to do that. And that made me feel like I'm a walking man.
Some valuable lessons have been learned from this venture. Develop a business plan and a marketing plan. Establish linkages with major players in the industry and secure a market before the time of harvesting. Marketing of the product should not be restricted to one place or sector. Ensure that your team is fully trained and that funders understand what is involved in this type of business. The success of this project shows that oyster farming builds the livelihood resilience of persons in the community and is a good alternative option in transitioning to more climate-smart employment. The AP&FM has funded sustainable projects like the Green Island Friendly Fisher Folks Oyster Farm, supporting efforts to build Jamaica's climate resilience. To date, the AP&FM has provided $4.7 million under the SCAF, which has provided grant funding for over 130 NGOs.
The whole entire grant was like an eye-opener. It sparked every light in your dream, you know? So this grant was really worthwhile for us.
It was early 2017 and life was looking rosy for Randy Finnegan. He had finally gotten his golden opportunity to become an onion farmer.
I have been farming here in Colbeck under 2 years to be exact. My partner and I, Stephen Robertson, we are into onion production and we have done some intercropping with Scotch bonnet peppers.
It had taken some work to secure the land in Colbeck St. Catherine, but soon after that, he got a climate smart loan from J&. Small Business Loans through their climate change adaptation line of credit, and he was ready to go. He got his team together and jumped into planting his first crop of onions for a growing market.
This is where we sow the seed.
Yeah.
So when we get this now, we transplant them in the farm.
He was particularly happy that through the loan, he had an irrigation system which would allow him to better fight the drought that was affecting Jamaica. Fast forward to May 2017.
We had actually experienced 3 floods on this farm. We lost crops due to the rain in the early stages. That was within 2 to 3 weeks after they were planted. Where I'm standing to the bottom of the gully, when measured, we have water up to 8-10 feet.
Quick interventions by Randy and his team helped him not to lose everything, but they have all learned some lessons from this experience.
I learned of the importance of gathering relevant data and other information about the area that you want to put under cultivation. We here have learned to be vigilant. We take nothing for granted where weather is concerned. We stay tuned to the forecasts, and we ensure that as part of our planting, mitigation strategies are employed.
On the farm, it's 6 of us, 4 females and 2 male. All of us work together as a team with the weeding and the sowing of the seedling. Through work as a team, we don't really, because the men push us and we also push them together to work.
My colleagues here in Colbeck have also recognized the work that we have done here to save this farm, and I have been voted in as their climate smart person. I am responsible to help to track resources, to attend to some larger issues, because the problem that faced me and this farm is not unique to just this farm.
It has not just been a learning curve for Finnegan, but also for the JN Small Business Loans.
Mr. Finnegan, as a part of his project, he produces a number of crops, but specifically for this particular facility, he wanted our assistance with building out his onion crop. And that included implementing drip irrigation as well as some other activities. And so the experience has really been a great one, and we were happy for the opportunity to have been able to assist him.
Similarly for the AP and FM, there has been some takeaways.
He had put in the infrastructure for irrigation. However, shortly after, he had the experience of being flooded out, where his crops were lost. This lesson has taught us that the necessary prerequisite before putting in expensive infrastructure is that landscaping needs to be done on the farm to prevent flooding and loss of soil and loss of crops.
My advice to farmers, climate change is here to stay. And we need to be more knowledgeable of the impacts of it. We operate in a sector that is vulnerable to weather shocks. Drought this period, too much rain the other period. We really need to get the data, be a part of farming groups and cooperatives that can help us to build stronger resilience.
Welcome back. I just wanted to inform you that later this afternoon, please head to the Coney Hall online in our conference, at our conference venue, to watch a replay of the Youth Forum, which was held earlier today under the theme of the conference, which is Living in Harmony with Nature, Issues, Challenges and Solutions. Now it is my absolute pleasure on behalf of the Honorable Pernell Charles Jr., Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, and our Permanent Secretary, Dr. Alwyn Hales, to announce the YEEP Youth Environmental Advocacy Program Bursary Awardees for 2021. The Youth Environmental Advocacy Program is a program hosted by the Ministry, specifically the Environment and Risk Management Branch, in collaboration with the Grace Kennedy Foundation, where we try to identify leaders at schools, youths below the age of 19, who have been actively engaged in environmental leadership roles, whether at school, in communities, in civic groups, and we try to award them and recognize that leadership and encourage them to advocate on behalf of youth on environmental matters. So this year we're happy to have the bursary awards again. And the judges for the awards were Ava Tomlinson from the National Environment and Planning Agency, Nadisha Poiser for the National Spatial Data Management Division of the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, Ajani Alain from the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, and Sondre Barrett of the Forestry Department. We thank our judges very much for their participation in the selection of the awardees. The criteria for application, the applicants must demonstrate a financial need based on information presented in personal statement or an application form. They must also demonstrate environmental service and leadership, again based on information presented in personal form. And then we also judge them on their responses to essay questions that were posed to them, and there were at least 4 essay questions that were posed. The bursary is, each bursary is valued at $40,000 and will be paid directly to the high schools that the awardees attend. The bursary funds are to be managed by the school's bursar and may be applied to activities and costs associated with students' educational development, except auxiliary school fees and vandalism fines, electronic devices, not including laptops and tablets, school memorabilia and graduation expenses, late fees for return of learning material, items for other students, and non-academic events. So this is just a contribution towards the further development of these students. So we're happy to announce today that our 6 awardees are Hele Black from Mount Alvernia High School, a grade 13 student. Congratulations, Miss Black. Mr. Tyrone Taylor from St. Andrew Technical High School, a grade 8 student. Congratulations, Mr. Taylor. Trudy and Tyson from the Carteret College, a grade 13 student. Congratulations, Miss Tyson. Marissa Smith from Manning School, a grade 10 student. Congratulations, Miss Smith. Sunil Bailey, Westwood High School, grade 13 student. And Rockery Brown, Titchfield High School, a grade 9 student. Congratulations again to all of our bursary awardees for the YEEP 2020 year. I'm also happy to announce and officially launch our poster competition under the 2nd National Biodiversity Conference. The Ministry is pleased to announce the launch of a poster competition for youth ages 18 years and below as part of its activities for the 2nd National Biodiversity Conference, which was held under the theme Living in Harmony with Nature, Issues, Challenges and Solutions. Details for submission to the competition are as outlined below. The poster competition is eligible to and open to Jamaican residents in the following age groups: 10 years and under, 11 to 15 years, and 16 to 18 years. Of course, none of the applicants must be employees of the ministry or are related to employees of the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change. They are not eligible for participation in this poster competition. The posters must be sizes 11 inches by 17 inches, landscape or portrait orientation. And you can have at least 2 entries per person may be submitted, and each entry must be registered separately. There are details regarding the type of poster, and you can find that online. But just to let you know, that the ownership of the posters will be the property of the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, and will be used in the ministry's public education and awareness raising activities. The criteria for judging the poster competition: relevance to the theme 40%, creativity and presentation 40%, and originality 20%. And then we will have prizes for the 3 age groups. Again, the 3 age groups: 10 years and under, 11 to 15 years, 16 to 18 years. For more information on the poster competition, please feel free to reach out to the ministry via email at ermb@mhurec.gov.jm. Again, ermb@mhurec.gov.jm. So now it is my pleasure to give the closing remarks for our second National Biodiversity Conference. We had a rich 2 days of interactions with a lot of local, regional, and international experts. And I would like to thank the moderators, the panelists, the lecturers for their participation in this event. I thought we shared a lot of information with the public, and I hope that the public was enriched by the discussions that we had over the last 2 days. Additionally, we had the youth forum, which we had today, where we tried to engage the youth to get their feedback as to what they believe would be the best approach to conserving and sustainably using the country's biological resources for present and future generations. We would like to thank all the persons, the dignitaries who participated in our opening ceremony, or the ambassador Jamaica, the Chinese ambassador to Jamaica, the British High Commissioner to Jamaica, our own Minister, Honorable Pernell Charles Jr., our Permanent Secretary, Dr. Alwyn Hales, and ably moderated by the Chief Executive Officer of the National Environment and Planning Agency, Mr. Peter Knight. So we'd like to thank all of the dignitaries for participating in the opening ceremony of our National Biodiversity Conference. Our Biodiversity Conference will be held every 2 years. So we hope to see you again 2 years hence to have yet another discussion, yet another interaction with the general population and key stakeholders and how it is best that we conserve and sustainably use our biological resources. In that period over the 2 years, we want to ensure that the public is actively engaged and proactively seeking ways and means to do work at the local level on preserving and conserving our biological resources. Information is power, and information is key, so we hope that you are duly empowered to go out and take action. The government, through the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, and the environment-related agencies, including NEPA and the Forestry Department, will be there to provide the necessary framework in which we can all actively participate in this exercise to preserve and conserve the country's biological resources. I would like to thank our partners, Bio, for their support in helping us to have this conference despite the COVID-19 challenges on a virtual platform. We would like to thank the AP and FM project of the PPCR for their financial support and also their participation in the conference. We would like to thank our other partners, the National Environment and Planning Agency and the Forestry Department, for their active engagement and partnership in hosting this, this conference. It would be remiss of me, however, not to mention some key officers within the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, which without their commitment and support and dedication, we would not have been able to host this conference so successfully. I would like to mention Ms. Joni Jackson and Ms. Nicole Origio, Ms. Joanne Felix, and Ms. Carmelita Barnett-Fidd from the Environment and Risk Management Branch. These are officers who every 2 years help with the technical aspects of hosting the event. We would also like to acknowledge the officers of the Public Relations and Communications Branch of the Ministry, Ms. Dani Clark, who has been very instrumental in terms of the logistics support in implementing this particular conference, and Ms. Heather Campbell. We would like to thank our facilities manager, Mr. Maynard Reed, for his support also in ensuring that the facilities were available for us to host the conference. So without further ado, and to thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to engaging with you again on other related topics on the country's biological resources. And please feel free to reach out to the ministry during the interim on this very important national issue. I thank you.
See, it's a lovely here in Kingston, Jamaica.
Good morning.
Conference kit in the lobby and then head straight to the Blue Maho main stage. So let's go ahead and see what is inside this conference kit. Here you have a lovely e-book provided by the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change and the NEPA. So you can just go ahead, click on it and it will be downloaded for you to be able to read it. And then we're going to go inside and have a look at the AccuWalk Expo Hall. We have 5 lovely exhibitors for today. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the NEPA booth. Wonderful. We have lots going on inside the NEPA booth. I'm going to turn my volume down, but please go ahead when you're exploring it for yourself to listen to all of the video presentations. There is a lot of information that is beneficial to you, so we encourage you to go and walk through each booth. We have a download package. You're able to get all the information from each booth holder. Save it to your device, whether you're on a cell phone, your tablet, your laptop computer, or your desktop computer. We'll go ahead and look and see what NEPA is all about. The National Environment and Planning Agency, an executive agency of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And you have all their contact information here, along with being able to just click and head over to any one of their, that's the pop-up for the download, everyone. You can go ahead and click on any of their social media handles to get more information about this wonderful executive agency. You can also have a chat with one of the NEPA representatives that will be online to get more information from them. I will go back out and let's have a look at the GEF Small Grants Program. We're watching some of the video content. Let me take you to full screen. Learning valuable information here. And then I will just take you through. We'll get some background information on the Small Grants Program launched in 1992. They have been working with communities around the world to combat the most critical environmental problems. They have a presence in over 125 countries and more than 14,500 community-based projects. It supports projects of NGOs and CBOs in developing countries, demonstrating that community action can maintain the fine balance between human needs and environmental imperatives. You can contact them by going to the UNDP building, 123 Lady Musgrave Road in Kingston, Jamaica. You have their telephone contact information, along with being able to email them directly. And you could go ahead and just click on this icon here to be able to go directly to their website. Let's now go over to the AP and FM for the PPCR Jamaica booth.
And create what we call alternative livelihoods. So those fishermen are transformed into another work.
Watching some of that video content, there are lots of groundwork being done by these organizations as they really challenge and get Jamaica to be greater in terms of biodiversity and conservation. Let's read a little bit about the program. AP and FM actually stands for Adaptation Program and Financing Mechanism for the pilot program for climate resilience in Jamaica, which began in September 2015. It is being executed by the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, MUREC. It is funded by the Climate Investment Fund, CIF, through the Inter-American Development Bank and the Government of Jamaica. Here again, you can go right ahead and click on any of their social media or their website icons to be able to connect with them even further. And you can also have a chat with a representative over here. Again, each booth has a lot of information for everyone to be able to peruse, so be sure to go and click on download package. To enable you to view the information at your reading during your reading time. We'll go ahead and jump over to the Forestry Department. Here we have a lovely banner telling us all about what a forest is, a complex ecosystem in which all organisms depend on each other to survive, an area of land with mainly trees and shrubs, and a habitat for animals where they feed, grow, and reproduce. Watching some of this video content that is coming from the Forestry Department, seeing so many different elements in nature that come together, and also being able to see on their photo slideshow over here, I'll go full screen for this one, some images coming out of Jamaica, some of our diverse types of forests that they have here.
Top to our shoreline, different types can be identified, including primary forests, untouched in their original state.
Again, you can jump over to their company profile information, letting us know that they are an executive agency charged with managing and conserving Jamaica's forest resources, particularly those found in public lands. They manage approximately 117,000 hectares of forests in Jamaica, and their vision is to have Jamaica to be a country where they value, or we value, our forest ecosystem and use its resources in a responsible manner. The mission is for them to be able to manage our forests in an effective and responsible manner for the benefit of current and future generations. Their contact information is right there. You can click on this link and it will take you straight to an email, or you can go ahead and click on their website, their Facebook, their LinkedIn, their Twitter, their Instagram, or their YouTube accounts to connect further with them. And again, you can go ahead and chat with a representative from the Forestry Department. And I know that they're having a drive right now based on the charge of our Prime Minister to have 1 million trees planted. So we encourage you to reach out to them to be able to do your part in getting Jamaica to where it needs to be in terms of biodiversity and conservation.
Sustain it, protect it, preserve it. Forests are vital for life on
Just
Earth.
watching some more content from the Forestry
Mangroves are
Department.
tropical and subtropical trees and plants.
Alright, as we go through, we're going to just go right ahead and click on the Natural History Museum of Jamaica and a section that goes with the Institute of Jamaica. Looking at some video content from
We
them
hope
here.
you have enjoyed your tour of the Natural History Museum.
And with their booth, you actually can go ahead and click on any of their banners and it will take you to different parts of their websites. You can, let's go ahead and listen to some of their audio. Here we have many different ways that you can connect with the Natural History Museum of Jamaica, with their Facebook, their Instagram, their YouTube, or their Twitter, along with being able to get to their newsletters, the Jamaica Clearinghouse Mechanism site, the Natural History Museum of Jamaica site, and the Institute of Jamaica site. So lots of ways to connect to the Natural History Museum of Jamaica. And then we go last but definitely not least to our photo booth. This is a way for you to be able to do a souvenir from this wonderful second Jamaica National Biodiversity Conference. So we encourage everyone to either click or scan to enter the virtual photo booth and have your photo taken and have that saved to your email, or you can post it directly to your social media using the hashtags for this year's conference. The hashtags are and I'll just give it to you in 1 second. Our hashtags are for this conference: our biodiversity, your future, and the other hashtag is get on board with biodiversity. I'll go with that once more. We encourage you to post your pictures that you've taken in our virtual photo booth by using the hashtags our biodiversity, your future, or get on board with biodiversity. One more time: our biodiversity, our future, or the other hashtag being get on board with biodiversity. We're now going to head to the Blue Maho stage, where we will be holding on for our live stream and the opening of our second day. Please feel free to either register for the platform. It is still open for registration to get the full experience of the second Jamaica National Biodiversity Conference by using the URL eventvio.com/NBC 2021. That is eventvio, eventvio.com/NBC 2021. Register and be a full part and have the full experience of the second Jamaica National Biodiversity Conference.